Welcome. Today we are working on the horizon block, and look how fantastic that is. Let's get started making the horizon block. Good morning, it's Helen with So Kind of Wonderful, and we are going to work on the next block in our Sedona pattern. We are working on the horizon block, and horizon is fun because we are actually going to use the leftover other side of these blocks. This was way back, a few blocks ago. And when we cut it, we cut a 5-inch square and we only used one side of it. So the instructions say to save this other side for your block 10, the horizon block. So that's what we're working on today, and I'll show you my fabric that I saved. These are my leftover pieces from the arches block. And what's interesting about this, even though we have all these leftover pieces, we're going to we only need half of them for this. Now, if you want the effect of a full circle here, then go ahead and use all that you have left over. But I'm only going to make it as it shows here, which is called the horizon block. So I only need half of what I have saved. So I'm going to keep these two, these two, and these two. These I've already sewn a curve onto. So let's get started and make our horizon block. All right, not only do you have the focus, the other half, but you should also have a stack of background pieces if you're using the same background. So here's my leftover stack that goes on the other side. So here you can see that I am ready to sew this on to here. So this is the A side and this is B side, and just like all of our sewing, our concave stays on the bottom, convex flips over, leave about a 1/4 inch tail there. If you do not have these already pre-cut, let's say for whatever reason you need to cut more pieces, you can start with a 5-inch square and your QCR mini ruler, and on the mini ruler there is a dashed V. Position that dashed V on two sides of your fabric. Sorry, that light is reflecting. And then go ahead and cut in the V, in this curve slot, and that's how I'm getting these two pieces. So it started with a 5-inch square, and you did that with both your background and your focus. So if you're starting over and you don't know where those pieces are, not a problem, this is how you're cutting them. For sewing, concave's on the bottom, I have my little tail. Go ahead, put it under the presser foot, sew a couple stitches, hold one piece in each hand, and as they feed, bring them together. This is a super easy method for chain piecing curves. So I'm going to just leave that one in. I'll start a new one. And then I'll do my last one. So you can see how easily these get sewn. So all of my blocks are sewn. I'll go ahead and show how I press. I like to press on the back first and try to, make sure you don't get a little fold. You're pressing in there, and then flip it over to the front and press on the front. So go ahead and press all of yours. I like to press to my focus fabric. Now we are at step 3 in our book, and here we are going to square this to 4 inches by 4 inches. So I'm looking at the book, I position my block the way it shows me. I'm using my QCR mini ruler, and I'm going to put a couple marks on here. I'm looking at the 4-inch line, and I go into the 1/8 inch mark, which is the solid line, and I put a dot with my gold Sharpie. And I did the same on this side. And let me show you those dots. So here, You can see it right on the 4-inch line, and again on this side. I have dots for other blocks we have made, but we're looking at the 4-inch mark right here. That dot right on the 4-inch line. Position those 2 dots right on your curved seam. You should have a little bit of the seam extend past on each end. Let's get that in focus for you. And let me show you how that looks. Can you see that dot right there? It's on my curve. And again, right there. The dot is on the curve. And now trim side and top. Rotate the block and then line up trimmed edges on the 4s on both the side and the bottom, and then trim whatever is left. And now you have this great 4-inch square with a curve in it. I also sewed one that had stripes, and I think it's good to show that sometimes you're using very directional fabric. So again, I'm going to line up my dots. So put the dots right on the curve, and then here, use one of your marks on the ruler and shift it until you feel like the stripes on your fabric line up with a line on the ruler. You do have a little bit of play between those 2 dots. And then trim the 2 sides and rotate. And this time you just put trimmed edges on your 4s. So that does show how much room you have to adjust when you are using directional fabric. Go ahead and square up the rest of your blocks. Here are my 6 blocks. They are all squared up to 4 by 4. The next step in our pattern says to take one of your blocks and you're going to measure and mark 2 3/4 on the corner. So we're looking at, it has it shown this way. So I'm setting it up the way it shows. Measure back from this corner 2 3/4, 1, 2 3/4, and I'm just going to put a mark on my mat. I oftentimes will mark my mat so I don't have to keep figuring out where something is again. So here's a mark on my mat, and then go 2 3/4 this way and put a mark. And now I have those 2 marks, and I'm going to, let's see, one is there and one is here. And I've put the corner of my block at this intersection. So I'll give myself a mark so I can remember what I'm doing when I do the next one. So that is lined up on the mat. Use a straight edge and a rotary cutter. And then I'm putting my straight edge from mark to mark. And then I am cutting here. So now you've cut a section out, And then what we're going to do is we're taking a 1 by 4.5 inch piece of fabric, and we're going to sew this back in. Anytime you have a unit, a block, you can cut it anywhere and sew a 1-inch strip in and sew it back together, and you'll be back to the same size. So let's first just go ahead and cut these at 2 3/4. So I'm finding the mark on my mat, positioning my block, lining up the 2 3/4 inch marks with my straight edge and cutting. Don't throw this side away. We're going to use it again. Just go ahead and keep trimming up, cutting your blocks on those marks. Here I have my blocks cut apart. Now before I start sewing everything back together, I need to decide, make one more decision. And this is just a design decision. Here I have my 2 purple blocks. Actually, no, this is my purple one. So I'm going to put them back together in units so I have my purples together. So when I put that piece of background in. What I need to decide is, am I going to sew the same fabric back on, or do I want to alternate these? I think it's really interesting when you alternate them, and it just adds something else for your eye to look at. And then we'll sew them together. So I think I'll do this. All right, I've taken the 1 by 4.5 and I've positioned it so I have about a 1/4 inch. It extends about a 1/4 inch from the edge over to this intersection here, and then again on the bottom. And I'm going to go ahead and sew a straight line, just using the edge of the block as my guide. Sew it on 1/4 inch seam. Here it is. I've sewn it on, and you can press the seam open, you can press to the side. Do what works for your fabric. And then my next step is I'm going to trim up these edges before I sew any more. The reason for that is it gives me a cleaner edge to work with on my next step for positioning. So you can do a couple things. I'm just going to line up the trimmed edges of the block with the 4 and the 4, and then that gives me my straight edge. I'm going to trim and trim. Now I'm taking my other purple piece and I'm going to position it right like this. Have about a 1/4 of an inch from this intersection to the edge, and sew this straight line. Here's my block, and I press toward that 1 inch strip on both sides. And I haven't trimmed anything up yet. It matched up pretty well here. I'm going to go ahead and trim that edge off, just so I get it back to that really nice and square 4-inch block that we want to work with. And there it is, super interesting. Go ahead and do the rest. Do the same thing with the rest of your blocks and square them up to 4 inches, and then we'll come back and sew them together. Here I have my blocks. I sewed in my accent strip. I've pressed. And one thing to point out, when you sew these together, sometimes you'll line them up and they don't line up really great. I mean, we wish we were perfect piecers and cutters, but we're not. So audition the other side, and one of those will match better than the other. So for me, this side matches a little better, so I'll sew this seam here. And here are the horizon blocks, all sewn together. They turned out great. You could see how if you wanted to make the other side, it would still be a super interesting circle, and a great complement for the arches block that you already used both sides for.